So What We Do in the Shadows is a TV show based off the 2014 film where it's basically a mockumentary kind of movie, kind of documents how vampires live amongst us in the world today. Today's review is going to be on the second series of What We Do in the Shadows. So without further ado, let's get into it. So if you saw my review of the actual film a few days ago, I was a big fan of it and recommended it to everyone. And as I went into the first series of this show, which aired in 2019, the first half of it I was unsure, but as time went on and got to the second half of it, I really enjoyed it. However, it doesn't really contain the same kind of feel and cleverness as the movie, but yeah, it's still a great show and very entertaining. Going into the second series, I think it continues the quality very well. It still has very entertaining episodes. It never really goes into that category where it's like unwatchable bad, but there are some kind of boring episodes which are kind of just there to fill the gaps. Whereas last season felt as though it was kind of like individual episodes which don't really connect to each other, except for like maybe the last two episodes. This season continues straight on from the events of what happened at the end of season 1, and it builds a nice arc for Guillermo, which creates some interesting scenarios which you get to see in full effect in the season finale. I'm not going to go into too much detail what that is because it's quite a nice surprise as you come across it. Now, someone I was a big fan of in the first season is Colin Robinson. He is the energy vampire. Instead of sucking blood out of his victims, he bores them to death and absorbs their energy. That's his way of feeding. But yeah, just anyway, we're treated to so much more of him this season, which I'm very pleased of. We actually get his own episode, which I think is the best in the season. And yeah, I think he's just such a great character just for how boring he is, and it's just funny seeing him absorb the life out of all the human characters. But yeah, not just Colin Robinson, but all the characters get their own moments. It's not heavily weighed onto one character. All of the main characters pretty much probably have an episode dedicated to just them. If not, all three of them in their own episodes share about the same amount of screen time, which is really good and consistent to see. Something the first season didn't go into too much until towards the end is the mythology. But this season dedicates a lot of episodes to it and explores it thoroughly, which just shows us a cooler look into this kind of universe and world. Yeah, and as I said in the first season, it took me about half a season to get used to these characters, but going into this season fully liking the characters and knowing who they are, it was a lot more enjoyable, and you can forgive some of their worser moments which didn't make you laugh as much, but yeah, you can forgive them because they're such lovable characters, all of them. And yet again, they just create some hilarious scenarios with just all the humans they interact with in public. Just like in season 1, this season also concludes with a great finale, which I'm going to talk a little bit more on in a bit. Yeah, overall, I was very pleased with this season. But now onto the cons. Kind of mentioned this earlier on in the review and in my What We Do in the Shadows 2014 review, but this series doesn't really contain as much of the cleverness and style of the film. I mentioned it kind of thoroughly in my review of the film, but I believe when an indie movie is executed well, you can't really match it no matter how big the budget or if it's a Hollywood kind of series. Still a great series, but feels quite different to the movie. Feels like they have a lot more resources, which, I don't know, I feel like the lack of resources made the film a lot better. Where this TV show is hilarious, there is a lot of jokes which don't land, but that is in the minority. It's outshone by the better jokes. It's just now and then a few bad jokes slip in there, which you're kind of entitled to a lot of shows, so forgive them, but just needs pointing out. I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but earlier on in this review I also mentioned there are some boring episodes, kind of what they call filler episodes, to fill out the duration of the season. Most noticeably for me is, as much as I love Nick Kroll, the episode that he's in this season, it kind of continues the kind of duel they had in the first season, but it doesn't necessarily really need to be in this season. I feel like it's just there to remind the audience that it's still an ongoing thing. But yeah, It was probably my least favorite episode of the season. No hate to Nick Kroll, because I actually love him, especially in Big Mouth, but it is what it is. And a big problem I have with this show in general is, so I'm going to chuck a few examples here. What We Do in the Shadows 2014, the movie, highly acknowledges the cameramen there pretty much the whole time. When they kind of come across new people, they're like, what's this for? Pointing at the cameras. And in The Office, you're constantly aware that there are camera people there, whereas the cameraman's not always there on like a private conversation. They just kind of film through the window. But with this, I feel like it kind of cheats that a bit. They just get away with so much being able to film. Like, there's so many places where they go into kind of sacred vampire things, and I'm guessing the camera people are human, so just having them there doesn't really make sense. Surely they would have been killed or something. And yeah, they do acknowledge that it is being filmed, because they obviously have their interviews just like The Office does. But I just feel like sometimes it kind of cheats that. But yeah, overall, my positives outweigh the negatives, and I think this is a great show and yet another great season. For me, it beats season 1 as we already know the characters, and it kind of expands the mythology a bit more. The series overall has an 8 out of 10 from me, and this season also gets an 8 out of 10 from me. I highly recommend watching, especially if you like the movie. However, it's slightly different in the way of approach. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.